Hello, and welcome to another episode of the AgNext Podcast, where we are always excited to tell you what is next from AgNext. I'm Pedro Carvalho.
And I'm Kim Stackhouse-Lawson.
Today, we have a very special guest here, our new Dean of the College of Agriculture Science, Dr. Carolyn Lawrence-Dill, and she'll talk about her role at Colorado State University.
Let's get into it.
Welcome, Dr. Lawrence-Dill. We appreciate you taking the time in your really, really busy schedule and being here with us today. So I would like to take a moment for you to introduce yourself and give us a brief synopsis about your background, your career, and your new role as Dean of the College of Agriculture Science at Colorado State University. Welcome.
Thank you. So I will start at the dawn of time, letting you know that I grew up in Texas, and I grew up in Texas in a very rural place. I grew up in Throckmorton, Texas, which is a town of about 800 people. I like to tell people that no one lives there. And so the question that I get sometimes in this role is about rural places and what do I understand about rural places? And I'll tell you, rural places really feel like home. The place that I grew up bills itself as the capital of the cow country. And I've never had a job before when I tell people that I grew up in Throckmorton and people go, oh yeah, I know where that is. That's a new one for me in this role, and it's a lot of fun. From Throckmorton, my family moved to just south of Fort Worth. So I've spent a good deal of time going to Fort Worth fat stock shows because they're a fantastic place to go, sort of a circus of animal sciences for sure. And having grown up in that area, I got a lot of opportunities, and those opportunities really amounted to all kinds of aspects of thinking about what I could be that was different. Living in Throckmorton, I always thought I would grow up to be a veterinarian.
Of course.
Because that was the closest thing to a scientist I had ever seen. And living in this larger place, Cleburne, for high school, I had some great science classes. From there, I went to school as an undergraduate at Hendrix College in Conway, Arkansas, where I majored in biology, still thinking that I was going to be a veterinarian, until I did a summer internship at Texas Tech University. And the internship that was available to me was working on cotton physiology. And I can tell you, up to that point, I always thought, and I say this often, that I thought plant biologists were Birkenstock-wearing, tree-hug, and hippies. And then I showed up at Texas Tech University and worked on cotton. So that work that I did on cotton really changed everything for me because I realized that growing up in Throckmorton with my parents, having a cow-calf operation and raising wheat, I had always taken apart every plant I had ever come across, and I just didn't realize there was a such thing as a job where part of it was knowing about plant biology and doing something with it. So that was a big shift for me to go from thinking I wanted to be a veterinarian to saying I didn't know that this was an option for me. So from there, I ended up at the University of Georgia and got a PhD there in a department of botany and got really into bioinformatics. This was late 90s. And in the late 90s was when computing on biological data became possible. Up to that point, people were not computing on complicated data types. So I moved from there to a postdoc at Iowa State University that was entirely in bioinformatics, and that developed into being able to apply for a job with the USDA's Agricultural Research Service that was entirely in bioinformatics. So I should say that maize genetics is what I got my PhD working in, and staying in that thread, working for USDA ARS, it was running the International Maize Genetics and Genomics Database for 10 years, which I should say I loved that job. I really loved working for the USDA's ARS. But you'll remember that 10, 12 years ago, everybody started talking about big data. And if you think about now is about AI. You can't do AI without big data sets, so that had to come first. Anyway, people were getting excited about big data, and people working at a database that had been managing complex data were really of interest to universities to be able to educate students in this upcoming area. And so Iowa State did a targeted hire, and I got hired there as an associate professor, never thinking I was going to work for the university. That always looked hard to me because of having to go out and get your own money for doing research. And it is hard.
It is hard.
Dimension. So I felt very lucky, like I had won the lottery to go to work at a university because it was a targeted hire. I gave them my CV, but I wasn't competing for it. It was a crazy thing, right? Mm-hmm. So
congratulations. That's a big deal.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Congratulations, 12 years later, right? It was a big deal. And at the same time, I can tell you, coming into a position that is not the way that everybody else on the faculty comes into a position can make some people really skeptical about you. Mm-hmm. Yes. And you have other problems to deal with that are social problems, but who complains? So the thing that I found I really missed while I was on the faculty at Iowa State was I missed the work I had done at USDA that was to support other researchers and support other people. It was all about my research. Sure. It was about the classes I taught. And when the position came up there, Associate Dean for Research, I jumped at it because it brought together the research, the work that I had done in education for graduate students during that time, and supporting other people to be able to get their work done. And so that was a turning point for me because I was moving from a faculty position into administration. I had to finish up my grad students. And all this time I had been telling people, someday I'm going to work at Colorado State University and I'm going to live in Fort Collins.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so that's how I ended up here.
It's funny because I keep taking notes and drawing a timeline here that can ask multiple questions to you. And I'm just thinking here. So my first question, and I like to ask this, on the internship. Let's go. That's probably was a turning point in your career, right?
Sure.
Were you exposed to research before that? What took you to go from a person who wants to be a vet to work with plants and then go from there? And that's one question. And the second question, was any special driven point that made you go from USDA to academia?
Yeah.
Was there any teaching appointment, something that made you take that decision? So let's go back to the first one about the internship.
So the internship, the reason that I wanted to take that internship was because I thought that having a research internship would look really good on my CV to get into vet school.
Sure. Of course it would.
Yeah. But not with plants too? Or
that was what was available close to where my parents lived, and I wanted to see them in the summer.
See, that's good.
And so I took it.
Just be open for opportunities. You'll never know.
Yeah, whatever, right? And this is something that I can say is a real benefit of the programs that get set up by the National Science Foundation and others, is that when those opportunities come up, you can get somebody into a situation they've never been in before and they would never have considered. And I feel like I'm one of those people that is an example of why those open internships are really helpful, is that it can really change the course of someone's life just for it to exist and they try something they never thought they would ever do before.
That's amazing. That's the question that I always like to ask, because I was one of the people I knew what I was going to work with, and I said I would never work with anything else other than cattle. I was lucky enough, but I don't think that opened too many doors for me. It was good, but a lot of my good friends, they were open to different experience and they grew in their careers just from a random internship, like you're saying. That's amazing.
Oh, can I also say it was hardest on my parents when I switched into working on plants, because I had spent 18 years of my life telling them I was going to be a veterinarian. And when I told them I was not even going to apply to veterinary school, they were in shock. And so it was really hard for me to even have that conversation with them, even though I was excited about something that was a new area for me.
And you mentioned science many times, and it seems like you're passionate about science, right? And when did that started? Like, was early on in your career? Like, were you exposed to science growing up, or was early during college, and that's the thing that drives you? I'm curious on that.
I can say that my 7th grade science teacher and my science teacher my freshman year, those two people had conversations with me on the side about how the things I was interested in, the questions that I had in class, that it was like an entirely different conversation with me. And it made me feel really good about my perspective on science and my interest in it. So I would say that those two people, Scott Hogue and Mrs. Briles, what was her first name? Katrina Briles, are the two people, and they've been teachers for years in that tiny town in Throckmorton, Texas, and they just encouraged me that I had a different perspective on that than the other kids did.
That's pretty good.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And the other question was like, what made you move from USDA, the job that you said you really like, back to academia?
I would love to say that there was something super positive. And instead, I will be completely truthful and tell you that we had just had a federal shutdown for 3 weeks. And I was told to shut down the database, which could have kept running on electricity. And it was sitting on a university campus. And it just broke my heart that the federal government would say, shut something down, don't give people access to it. There was that. And then on top of that, over the years, I got more interested in going after problems that were of interest to me, that I also knew were of use to other people, that were outside of the scope of what the job was. And so I would say that really what happened there was that the level at which I wanted to be doing my work was just incompatible with the job that I had with USDA, and I had started looking around. And I suspect that part of the reason that the university made a targeted hire was because they probably had become aware that I was looking.
I see.
Sure. And that makes perfect sense. So you've had an incredibly successful career that has been fun to hear you talk about. When you think about translating that experience through your entire time, even if it's from 7th grade, into your new role as dean, what are you most excited about?
I guess one of the things that really thrills me about being in this role is facilitating the ideas that other people have. I've been in a lot of roles where it felt like there was some top-down description of what mattered and what people ought to be working on, and I have never approached my job in that way. And so being able to be in a position that actually influences the work that everyone else is doing, but also being able to learn from them what matters to them and why, and to facilitate that at this level is huge to me, because I feel like it takes a certain skill set to create the framework that helps people to be able to work together. And that's the skill set that I've really worked on over the course of my career, in some ways to my own detriment, because many of the requirements for getting through promotion and tenure are incompatible with team science. And that has been something that has just been a thread throughout my whole career, is how do we make a team? How do we all work together? How do we figure out what we ought to be working on together? So I feel like this job with that orientation is sort of a unique situation.
Absolutely. Do you have anything you're particularly excited about? I know you've only been here a very short time, but is there a problem that you think is particularly fascinating, that you would like to be, or that you're hopeful for in the future, working towards?
So there's a topic that is sort of all-inclusive that people describe variously as either being sustainability or regenerative agriculture. And I think that my excitement for it stems from two different places. One is the fact that I have a 16-year-old, he's about to be 17, who from the time he was little has talked to me about his concern about what he's learned about increasing CO2 in the atmosphere, what's the future of the earth, these kinds of things. And I always say to him, we're going to solve that. And I'm such a technocrat about things. I really believe that we are going to solve that. And you can see that when you talk to people about we're going to solve that, that's not always the perspective that they're given. So I think that matters. And the other part of that really is about having a team of people that they also think that we can solve that and go after it. So I said two words, sustainability and regenerative agriculture. I always think of those two things as sustainability being something like, how do we keep doing whatever it is that we're doing and have sufficient materials to keep doing it? And I think of regenerative agriculture as, how do we improve the situation? How do we improve the soil? How do we improve the animals? How do we improve the plants? And so I think sustainability is a worthwhile goal, and it's something that applies to many different areas of research that we're involved in. But when it's possible to actually move into regenerative agriculture where you're fixing the planet, that's what I was talking to my 16-year-old about, is that we, the scientists, are going to do that. Wow,
that's pretty cool. I mean, you mentioned early on you always want to work for CSU. Now,
say that.
And CSU is well known by its sustainability and commitment and everything. Kim just mentioned you've been here just such a short time. You started about a month, early August, I think, right?
Yep.
What has been the most rewarding thing for you in this new role that you have faced so far? Is there any?
I would say that the most rewarding thing has been getting to know about the work that people do at CSU in a detailed way, to be able to spend the time having conversations where I get to learn about the nuanced way that people think in these areas and how they're going after all of these, especially partner-driven needs. So those conversations that I just mentioned about having them with the faculty, having them with grad students and with undergraduates, that's great. I've also been having similar conversations with people all around the state. Mm-hmm. And to be able to have those conversations and then to pair up the expertise with the practical problems that are going on around the state, and to figure out where the rub is, where something's not getting done and why those things are not getting done, and how we can build the team that could actually go after it. That's the space that I really enjoy spending my time.
When you're talking to these different groups, from undergraduates to graduate students to faculty members to stakeholders, et cetera, what are you hearing from them? Are you hearing similar themes, or are there very different themes? How disparate are the things they're bringing up?
So I'll start with students. Students are in love with the science, and they're trying to build themselves. Oftentimes, a student has a project that someone else got that project to the point that it's available for them to work on, and they learn about it, and they have new ideas that the person, their faculty member, sometimes didn't think about it that way. And so that's that huge opportunity to do something new and different. The conversations that are with people on the faculty are really about, how do I align the things that I want to work on with what needs to be done in the state. And those faculty members are not always out there having random conversations with anyone all around the state. And so to be able to bring to them, I heard this thing that kind of sounds like what you do, and then to make that connection, that's huge.
Yep.
And the people around the state, they are really looking for someone to listen and care about what they care about. And I think probably the worst thing we can do is to get someone connected that they actually don't care about the same things, because it causes us to have friction that's just unnecessary. So right now I feel like I'm building my own database just to understand how to put people together over time.
That's a great point. And it's funny, we've been talking about sustainability, connection, integrating things, and the question that I have is, like, sustainability is a key component of our research and also for the College of Ag, right? How do you plan to integrate sustainability into students' curriculum and also support research initiatives throughout the college? Not only us, but also throughout the college.
The first thing I want to draw attention to is something called the CSU Climate Initiative. One of the things that the CSU Climate Initiative has brought attention to at the university level is bringing climate education into all disciplines, that all courses that are taught will have some aspect of that. I think that's huge. The next part, though, is thinking about sustainability. So oftentimes people will come up with sustainability as how do we keep the soil producing, or how do we improve the soil? But it also is about how do we make sure that we're improving crops in a way that they require less inputs. How do we improve cattle in a way that we're making more milk with less feed? And all of these aspects have some part of sustainability, and I think that most people don't think about that word and think about all of the work that we do in a College of Ag as tracking onto sustainability. But almost without exception, it all tracks with sustainability. And so if you step back from whatever research question you're on, you ask yourself, how does what I'm doing relate to sustainability? Most people can actually make that connection. If you're working in basic research and you just learned how some particular protein works, once you understand how it works, then you may be able to change how it works. And if you change how it works, then it's possible to, for example, if it's a protein that's involved in photosynthesis, maybe you end up being able to make more biomass in a shorter period of time. But the research that was going on that was really basic about that one protein, it may not have been obvious until much later that it relates to sustainability.
That's pretty cool.
Yep, absolutely. So we're going to switch gears and kind of ask some perspectives that you might have from the college level. So when you think about opportunities for the College of Agriculture Sciences and AgNext, what kind of collaboration do you envision in the future as it relates to the realm of sustainable animal agriculture?
Well, I feel like I should ask you that question back. Let me start there. Let me just say how impressed I have been with the answers to all the questions that I've had of AgNext. My background is in genetics and genomics, and Kim, you'll remember one of the things that I keep asking about is when you look at emissions from cattle, methane emissions, CO2 emissions, whatever, I've been very curious all along about what the variability is across cattle that look the same, that have the same mass, that you can't tell the difference among them. Are they the same with what their emissions are? And so I've been really interested personally in the work of Sarah Place to figure out how we can start selecting on those parameters, because it's almost always the case, whether you're talking about corn or you're talking about cattle, that you can maintain high diversity in ways that unless you're measuring it, you're not selecting it. And so I see the work that you're doing to start measuring these things across diversity to figure out how we can select on it. This is really the beginning of selecting on the outcome that is about these emissions. What's really unique about it is that already with the things that have been selected on, sustainability has been improved in so many ways, but not in this dimension. And so for me, the fact that something is being measured means that that's something that we can select. And to be intentional about that is huge.
Yeah, it is. It's what we're most excited about. Pedro here has a grant that goes in 4 days.
Yeah, by the time that is being released, we probably
it'll be out. It'll be out by the time everyone's listening to this podcast. That is an expansion on that work as well.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely, and is also involving collaborators in our breeding and genetics team with Mark Inns and also our microbiome team. Yeah. Because excellent. Of course there's unique relationships there as well.
That's the mid-science genetics microbiome. We hope to get that and keep doing that research. We mentioned research, and that's a key component. Measuring, you said the fact that we are measuring, that's important, right? Another important piece of the land grant institution and CSU and our work here is identify the scale solutions for animal agriculture. CSU is well known for research and extension, direct to producers. I actually saw, maybe Kim saw, and everybody saw that the other day you were in a producer dairy farm, looking at the farm. So what is the college future goals on extending this knowledge to the producer level? We talk about the research. We are recording the podcast to extend this to all of our listeners. Is there like anything that you think you like that you aim to do specifically on the extension side, and extending this knowledge to the producer, students, and all of our stakeholders?
So let me back up a little bit and say that I've never had an extension appointment. And at the same time, I can remember having many conversations with people in extension about a lot of the work that I've done has been about extension, but it's not been under the umbrella of extension, right? That you go out and you try to find out what the problems are, you work on it, and hopefully you work on it together, and you sort of co-create what it is that you're working on and what the solutions are. So I think of the land grant university, which we are one of. They started with education. The university is all about education. If the education doesn't have all the best knowledge about ways things ought to be, which is where the research comes in, then we're not teaching the best things. And so if you just look at how land-grant universities picked up the mission, you started with education, they brought in research, and then extension came into play. And extension is a lot like education, but these people are not our students, right? So the things that we've learned in education, the things that we have learned in research, how do we make sure that they're influencing what's going on out there for producers? How are we improving the economy? To me, that's what extension is. And I would say that my biggest goal for extension is to make sure that the people that we're working with, first within the state, but also nationally and internationally, that the kinds of things that we're going after are useful and useful to them, and they learn about it. And so that last part of it, that is the and they learn about it, I would say this is one of the things that I'm really working at right now, is making sure that our research, in a way that a person could understand it, gets out there. And so being able to have research vignettes that, imagine if every paper we write, we have something that comes out and it's 2 or 3 paragraphs that tells somebody what it is that we're doing. That will spark their creativity and their thinking about what problems we could solve. And so I feel like a lot of what it is that we get out there is going to prime the pump for the extension work that we do.
That's the main goal of having this conversation, right? Yep. Is so our stakeholders, people can listen more about you, about what your goals are to the university, and help them as well, right?
Absolutely. It's one of the hardest things our faculty does, I think. And it's our team, as you know, we pride ourselves at being good at that sort of scientific translation, but it's still not easy. And we notice a lot with our producer partners and other stakeholders that they may not just have access to the peer review literature, or they may not have the time. And oftentimes the questions that are coming to us have already been answered in the literature. And so sort of thinking creatively about how not just to get out our own research, but also the research of other collaborators is something that is top of mind for us as well. And it's not easy to do.
Yeah. That's it's a professor. It's a job that should be done like professors, teachers. Like it's educating people. And I think I start to think about this because I want to go back to your first teachers and maybe ask about their mentors. You mentioned Scott and Katrina, right? Your 7th grade teachers, and maybe the role of people who are working in education is to share knowledge and guide students and mentorship. I always like to ask the question, how has mentorship been important for you in your career? And you probably have guided also a lot of students. And I always like to ask how important has been mentorship to you, and how important for you guide other students? as well?
So I'll start with how important it's been for me. I have always been so grateful for people that see something that they think I could learn and it would be useful to me, and then they have spent time working with me. So, of course, that's true for the mentors that we have that are our professors, someone official, like a person that is your master's mentor, your PhD mentor. But sometimes you also just come across people that you think, I saw something in that meeting that person did that impressed me. And you go to them and you tell them that it impressed you. And then you say, would you be willing to mentor me? And thus far, I have never had someone say no. So anyone that you walk up to and you say, I saw you do that, I want to learn how to do that, I mean, they want to help you, right? So mentorship is really important, and kind of putting yourself out there. It's hard because it's kind of like asking somebody on a date, right? What if they say they won't be your mentor? For many years, I have told people what I see and what I want to get from them, and they've always been very accommodating. The same has been true largely with students. So I've not been a person in my research space where I've gone out looking for students. Instead, I've been in situations where I give a seminar and a student will say, I really love what it is that you're doing over there. Do you have a place for me, right? Mm-hmm. So it's very natural.
It's the best way.
Yeah.
I think so too. When someone's excited about a topic, they'll go after it. And when it's not a natural fit, it's hard work. And if it's not a natural fit, it's even worse, right?
Yep.
Absolutely.
That's true.
So we only have one more question for you, and it is the final question on each one of our podcasts. But how do you define sustainability?
So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I'll try to get more specific. I think of sustainability as being how you make sure that the inputs that you have are there for the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. I have also been in situations, though, where we've looked at paragraphs and the word sustainability has been used up to 3 different ways in one paragraph. So I think that it is important to ask that question to make sure that when we're communicating that we're not just using the word, we're saying exactly what it is that we're talking about.
No, I agree. Thank you for joining us on the podcast, and thank you for joining us as our listeners on another episode of the AgNext Podcast, where we will always be discussing what's next on AgNext. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, X, and LinkedIn. If you have comments, suggestions, feedback that you would like to give us, please send us an email to agnext.colostate.edu, and we'll do our best to get back to you as soon as we can.
Thank you.
Thank you.